venues are Community Folk Arts Center, Point of Contact Galleries, and the Syracuse University Art Museum. The overarching themes of carrying the thick present take shape by reflecting upon three interrelated notions, that of trauma, fabulation, and intimacy. Each of these themes unfold at the venues and the individual galleries. Each artist joining us today is exhibiting at a different gallery, so these interconnected themes will pop up throughout our conversation. I'm going to wait just a few more seconds to kind of let people filter in before we begin. But if you do have any questions throughout our conversation, you can always pop them in the Q&A column down below. You'll see a little tab for it, and we'll answer those towards the end of the conversation. So now that we've had a bit of time, I'm hoping everyone has had the chance to join us, and we can get started by introducing each of the artists themselves. Ayesha Rumi, our artist joining us from Point of Contact, synthesizes storytelling, documentation, and imagination to unpack themes of identity, politics, conflict, and what she calls artifactual history. Ayesha's work forces viewers to question reality and normative narratives through her use of painting, collage, and digital projections. These combined processes depict and overlay language with personal stories and the captured images of communities in Pakistan. Cady Spencer, our artist joining us today from Point of Contact, explores expanded painting with sculptural and immersive experiences. Cady's work engages viewers with their bright hi-fi colors, expressive sculptural gestures, and intimate reflections on the internal dialogues of pain, trauma, coping, healing, and what she calls situationships. Matthew Apol, our artist joining us from SU Art, creates frameworks for critical engagement and dialogue through deconstructing and recontextualizing materials and their perceived hierarchy in the fine arts world. Matthew's work dually invites viewers to participate in deconstructing perceptions of value through collaboration, and his work here at SU Art has gone even further to enhance the accessibility of partnership and interaction with viewers through technology. Ultimately, between all of these artists working, they're seeing modes of alteration in order to challenge or change perceptions. And that's what I want to start this conversation on, is each of these artists get to explore that and get to share that within their works with us today.
Thanks, Cady.
Thanks, Cady. Does anybody want to start?
Yeah, I think you should start.
Okay, we, Kate had mentioned how my work kind of adds in it. I feel like all of our work, all three of our work has multiple layers, right? Like we all work, it's not, you're not working on kind of a single plane of interaction with work from any three of us. So like, I won't completely speak for Cady, but like, you're immersed in her work physically. Like you're actually, you walk into an experience, with her work. And again, I won't speak with that. And then with Ayesha's work, I feel like there are multiple layers of perception, and through those layers, she is actually asking the viewer, or trying to get the viewer to consider almost kind of transportation to a completely different place, right? And then with my work, it's kind of like it's more of an actual kind of interaction in the space where I'm asking the viewer to, okay, we're here, we're in the present moment, and now you're going to have to investigate a little bit deeper in order to kind of reveal the layers that we're all talking about, right? So going further into my work is, like there is the layer of, I want to challenge the viewer and, kind of be critical of the gallery and critical of the gallery setting, and like, what people perceive as materials for fine art and as objects for fine art, and, what fine art is and what art is traditionally. That's the first layer. And then kind of the next step is, all right, if you are going to consider this material as art, and consider what I'm trying to communicate to you, like you can possibly find an additional layer of meaning, and one that asks for your more interaction, more collaboration.
Yeah. Aisha, your work, thank you, Matt, for bringing that up. The centrality of place is evident in all of your works in very different ways. Aisha, yours in particular really calls visually, as Matthew put it, to other places. And could you explain a little bit more about that, particularly with your work that's being shown at Community Folk Arts Center?
So it started with a very simple concept of ephemerality. I was very drawn to this whole idea when I was just working with the materials. So I would specifically go and find materials which, after they've been created, they're their own entity in the world, and how they interact with the world, and that changes that happens. I was very fascinated by it because work or any object that an artist create, I feel like once it's created, it's its own entity. The ownership value sort of decreases. I have ownership of my work while it's in the process of it, but once it's complete, I have to let it go. So, and I never thought of applying that concept to myself and where I was coming from, why I am the way I am. And I think coming into Syracuse gave me that perspective to think about me. And when I started doing that, I started to think about the space and how that space made me, and then how that space influenced me in giving me a perspective how to see the world. Similarly, I've applied the same concept when I talk about overlapping narratives, which is actually a self-portrait of all the things that I've seen, all the mundane things that were going on around me, which I actually thought was very normal, which I actually thought was, never actually gave them much thought. But that detachment from that place, I actually got to revisit my identity and the place I was born in a whole new light. And that is why if you see in the work, if you don't mind me sharing the images. Of course. So yeah, in this work, it's a very congested piece. There's so much going on in that piece. And that is one way of looking at the way I look at personalities. As Matthew talked about layers, we are layers. Like our personality is, based on layers. So I actually physically also work with layers. Like this is like 10 different layers on a flat surface. And there are my self-portraits, and it's as well. There are images which are hidden, which were I've never actually paid much attention to them, but I would get into detail why I selected such and such images. So, but you have to be really careful what you want to look at, because it's so much. And I think every artist or every personality on the planet has that sort of persona. You are aware of one side of their personality, but not the other. It's on you what you choose to see. So
these are beautiful works.
Thank you. So you can see it's actually the concept of layers is actually physically present in it as well. And then while I was exploring that concept, one thing that struck me is that I am a multilingual person, yet I do not have command over any language. Like growing up, I was taught, like I had to study 3 languages. I had to study English, not my mother language. Then there was Urdu, but the emphasis was never on Urdu. And then it was Arabic, which was the most troublesome language. I'm a practicing Muslim, and I was supposed to pray 5 times a day and study and read and write Quran. And all our societies, from the smallest things to the biggest, the laws and everything is structured around religion, which is very fundamental. Yet people do not know what it says. Like the language is alien to them. They can read it, they can recite it because they've learned it, but they cannot decode what it's being said. So that was very, very problematic for me, that how can someone who says that they are Muslims and they all of their life is based upon this book, yet they cannot decode it, what's actually saying. That really struck me, and this whole issue that I had with language, it made me frustrated. Like I wanted to say something, but I could never sort of navigate myself. How should I say it? What words should I say? Because words are so limiting. Like in English, if I use the same word as in Urdu, it's gonna have its own implications and its own baggage with it. Yeah. So that is when I started constructing my own language. And this language that has been constructed is purely based on my muscular movement. So I came across this pattern. I never had anything in my mind preconceived before doing this, before starting to write. It's just like closing my mind and my eyes and let the muscle do their work. And I realized that this is exactly the reason why it was doing that, or as I like to underline it, that we are forced to read and forced to memorize a language which is not ours to begin with. And we have to focus our lives according it. And it resembles something like Arabic, right? What I'm writing. So it became a metaphor that my life is defined by this, yet I do not know what this is. So whatever I write, it's mostly and purely my muscle memory, my memory of hair and hair. I have no idea what it says, nor does the viewer. But I just know that feeling of aggression, and I want to say something, but I don't have the words to say it. Yeah. And this I'm gonna actually talk about in Cady's work when I sort of, it's a language of visuals and colors, so much so that when you walk in her space, you're bombarded with so many things. And yet you feel flustered, like you feel that mute. You want to say something, but you don't have the words for it.
It's very odd to walk into Cady's spaces because it feels like you are entering another place. And you bring up a great point, Ayesha, that hopefully, Cady, you can explain a little bit more about, is this idea of you don't have control over what's immediately around you or what's impacting you, but you go into your artistic processes trying to understand that, and you let your body and you let the art and the materials themselves direct you in that conversation of creating. Cady, can you explain that a bit more with your work in particular?
Yeah, I think part of the reason why I do that is I grew up around here in upstate New York, and actually Homer, New York. And I was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So when I was a kid, I would go outside and play with whatever was around and reinterpret like whatever log or stick or like, old tractor part that we found lying around. And I think that part of the reason I do that is, like you said, it does give me like a sense of control, but I think it's also play too. Like the control and the play go together so that I can make these objects my own, because like you said, the world is chaos. Like what happened this last year, I literally had no control over any decisions being made none of us did, right? Yeah. So I think that my big focus on this project was really to kind of create a space for other people to come into, but it really is like, it's kind of for it's myself. This is like the inside of my mind that you're walking into, and all of these things that I've transformed to be mine, that I am now sharing with other people in the space.
That's incredible.
It feels that way, right? Like you walk into it and it kind of feels like you are kind of picking and prodding and poking at the cobwebs is the wrong, probably the wrong
mind dust.
Like, yeah, like kind of like the little connections that are happening in there. And like there is it's not just visual, correct? Like there is a scent, correct?
Well, okay, so I originally wanted to do a scent. It's like a very subtle, if you can smell it, great, but everybody has masks on. But I wanted to do a like kind of synthetic sweet smell. I was mixing like oatmeal cookie with peach and bubblegum, like essential oil.
Wow.
Chocolate.
Kind of disgusting, but like you still had that sweet smell. So
very familiar to a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
It was very strong. Maybe because I
it was not anymore. It's a little bit more subtle now.
Speaking about that feeling of you want to say something yet you don't have the words for it. When I first saw Matthew's work, it's made up of a material which it's supposed to contain things, right? If I'm Matthew, if I'm right, yeah. So it was so interesting to see something that in the gallery, when the artwork comes, these are the crates that you open, and then you open the artwork and then you put it up. But he chose to do the opposite. He's using the gallery space, yet he's using something which is tossed outside, like outside the gallery, and the work is there, but he chose to represent that. So the whole metaphor that he was trying to play with, because me and Matthew, we should talk a lot about this gallery and white cube, and he is a bit of a rebellious when it comes to that, but he did it in such a beautiful way that I was like, hats off that you did it. And talk about that. I mean, your association and disassociation with the gallery system.
Can you also explain the material that you're talking about that's included in your work? Because some people who are viewing with us may not have seen it yet, and I think it's a really cool thing to unwrap.
Sure. So if I was smart like Aisha, I would have had or like Cady, I would have had, something queued up. I don't, and I'm not going to share my desktop. No way. I basically have, I have paintings or art objects that acts as paintings, and they're made of OSB, which stands for Oriented Strand Board, which is a type of, basically a type of material that kind of came up as a rival, or as not a replacement, but as an alternative to plywood sheeting. And it was invented in the early 60s, and it really, really kind of came to its own once they figured out how to streamline the process and make it, it's a bunch of basically rectangular wood chips that are laid on top of each other in different orientations, and then sprayed with resin and wax, and then you really, really squished together with a lot of pressure, and then cut into sheets. And it is that you see a lot of it in in residential construction. It's not so much in commercial construction, just because you see more cinder block and more things like that. But like if a house is being erected, once the foundation is laid, and once the 2x4s are up, usually the next step is to put either plywood up or OSB up. And I mean, you see it in Syracuse, you see it everywhere. Usually if there's a new construction, it's either going to be plywood or it's going to be OSB. The reason why OSB kind of came about as an alternative was because in some ways it was supposed to be a more cost-effective alternative and a more sustainably sourced alternative, but in some ways it's also more functionally superior. With plywood, there's a greater chance of basically moisture getting between the plies, which are layers of wood that are stuck together for plywood. And then the plywood can bubble, the plywood can crack, things like that. And because OSB is a whole bunch of oriented pieces of wood that are all covered in wax and resin, which happen to be waterproof, it's harder for basically moisture to get into that surface. So coming back around, so that's the material. And basically I've positioned 4 pieces of OSB. I've cut them down. I used to be a roofer, and we used to use OSB and plywood a lot when we would patch holes on the roof if something was rotten. And I have cut them down in the same manner that, you know, we would have cut down the OSB to patch a roof. And then, you know, made panels out of them, framed them up real tightly. And if, you know, if you're not real close to them and you don't really quite understand what you're looking at, they operate kind of as paintings. So that's, that's basically what we're talking about as a visual.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So you said that you would use it to like cover up rotten spots of the roof. So are you using that as a metaphor for the gallery? Like you're
it's not quite you know, it's not quite using it as like, this is patchwork or this is covering up my rotten spots. It's more, but it is more, it's kind of more in line of kind of what Aisha said, where it's like, this is a material that's, you know, always covered. This is a material that's always, you know, the means, but never the end. So like, and it does go kind of to that, right? Like, you know, if we had to replace a piece of the roof, we would, then tar paper would go down, then shingles would go down, and you'd never see the OSB again, unless you were in the attic and there was no insulation. So yeah, like it's something that is, it's functional, it's utilitarian, and it's not supposed to be, you know, aesthetic, or it's not supposed to be art, you know, and I mean, if you're familiar with, you know, what OSB looks like, you know, it's minimal yet incredibly complex. It's, you know, overlooked, and also I think it's absolutely gorgeous, you know, so it's that to me.
Yeah, I would disagree with, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you go ahead.
I would disagree with the fact that you say it's not art. Depends on your definition of it. Anything that goes through that extensive process, I mean, holds, you know, it should have its place on the pedestal.
That's the idea.
And the way you frame them, the way you are putting it up, you are actually celebrating something which is always hidden, always in the margins, never talked about it, but yet it's very important. So the way the conversation that you were trying to set it up also made me feel like this is so important, that we don't think about the things that go behind the whole thing, the process of the work, you know, things that make the final output the way it is. We only take things that's the face value.
Right.
So
right.
Going deep into that, I know that you were struggling in grad school with a lot of things that you wanted to say. You had a lot of your ideologies. And so this work, is this a reflection onto what we previously discussed about the whole system of how art is situated in nowadays?
It can be like, it's, I mean, as from a personal standpoint, it is, you know, it's, for me, it is kind of talking about the oversimplification of anyone and anything that, you know, you make your assumption about and then move on. So like, yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that's kind of more, if there is a, you know, an aspect of a self-portrait or something like that, it is the material itself for me. And yeah, absolutely. I think that's more for me, you know, like I personally connect with the material because of the history. But yeah, it's there for sure. Yeah.
And Cady, you even use material that follows those same lines. Seeing your work, the reflective structures behind you, if you'll explain a little bit of that, because that exactly. That aligns with Matthew's materials that he's using for construction, where he's embracing that visual and bringing it to the forefront, whereas you're using the same material in a way, but you're flipping it and creating an atmosphere, if you could describe that.
Yeah, I've actually used a lot of insulation foam in a lot of my work because I like the fact that it, like, as a material, it's something that's hidden, like Matthew was saying, but it's also something that's like it's a protective layer. So it's keeping things out and keeping what you want inside. So I was thinking a lot about that and creating my own little bubble space, obviously. But the other thing that attracted me to the panels that you see behind me, as the metallic material, like I'm really interested in kind of dystopian sci-fi novels, film. So I wanted to create kind of that sensation in the space. And they're also like, I mean, how many of us are just staring at screens all day? So, I mean, that like reflective, like light coming off, it really made me think of just being, you know, on Zoom all the time. And we're in these little bubbles and isolation. So, yeah, I really was thinking a lot about that with this work.
Yeah, and I know your larger body of work does talk about creating these bubbles as a response or a way of comforting during areas of trauma or difficult emotions. And I know, Ayesha, your work also kind of dives deep into that conversation. If either one of you want to share that with us, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat the question because I wasn't able to hear it?
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. Cady, I was connecting Cady's work and her creation of spaces
Right.
as a comfort, as a bubble in response to trauma or difficult emotions aligns with the work that you do as well. And if either one of you want to kind of talk on that and dive deeper into that kind of theme, I know we'd all love to know.
Sure. For me, dealing with it was sort of a trauma that I was never able to situate myself, like really, who am I? For me, it was like actually tipping the jar, like really pouring myself out there and explaining and showing the ugly parts of where I am from, not just the pretty parts. Dealing with that was very hard for me. It took me 3 years of grad school and of mentoring that it's okay. In order to face something, you need to accept it first. So I had to accept it where I'm from. It has its ups and downs. And I cannot be hiding the downs all the time because if I'm doing that, I'm not facing my traumas. So when I started talking about it, it became easier for me to own them, accept them, and be proud that yes, they are part of my personality or my self-portrait. So creating that space for in my second work, I actually tried to do that, which was the ice cellar. I documented these. So the documentation was done in the most in a way that it was not invasive, like my presence was not there, because I actually wanted the viewer to actually have their own judgment of what is happening. I was not in control of what is like all the things that were happening all around them as well. Similar to my work, your eyes can, it's up to you what you want to see in the piece. Similar to the ice cellar, there is a video being projected onto a self-created surface, but it's up to you. What point do you want to focus on? I'm sorry, I took the conversation in a
It's okay.
different way, but yeah, I'll share this screen again. So just to give you an idea of that created space. And it's not changing, right? Never, sorry.
Oh no, it's okay.
Yeah,
And so these are the projections in that you
Yeah.
can see at Community Folk Art Center, correct?
Right. So the reason why I keep my palette constricted to 3 colors, it's because for me, the 3 things that I had was very personally involved with or had a very personal connection with was education, domestic violence, and child labor.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came back here, I realized that all these 3 entities, they are connected. And they're connected in the sense that our education system is made up in a way that propagates domestic violence, that propagates child labor. And I didn't want it to be the person who hypothesized or theorized, oh, this is how it's happening. Instead, I sort of developed this rhizomatic structure of talking about things. Like I gave you 3 primary colors, and whatever the secondary, tertiary colors that come from the emergence of these, that's how complicated the situations are. I have just highlighted the tip of the iceberg, but I don't know how deep down all of these things are entangled together. So yeah, putting all these cameras in different locations, they're not just focused on these people, but also what is happening all around it. So when the viewer sits in this space for an hour and really observe it, they can understand how things are happening and why they're happening. Yeah, so that was my whole idea of the way the way I wanted to make a space which is sort of exposing who I am, but at the same time making the other person understand why I am.
Yeah. It does take those levels of intimacy and getting to know the artist and the other person, usually on the other side of the screen from us, if we're talking about technology. And I know, Cady, your work talks about that as it applies to the materials, as well as you invite viewers to get to know these kind of abstract, unusually materialized objects. And if you could speak on that, because I know that's a conversation we've had, and I think that leads into the conversation of technology, which, Matthew, you utilize greatly within your current work.
Cady?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, but I feel like I kind of want to bounce off of what Aisha was saying about, just trauma. And I mean, it's just kind of a vague term, right? It's just like life happens, and then all of your, actually, there's this thing that I learned, it's epigenetics. It's basically the study of how, like, when you go through different experiences that are, heighten every single part of your body because it was stressful. It actually changes the DNA and how it's read in your body. And I've been thinking about that a lot with how I'm transforming my materials that I have in the space. Because I'm taking these objects, like, not only am I doing it for like my own sense of control, but I'm also like, I'm almost like reenacting what's happened to me, and like breaking things apart and building them up and kind of transforming them into new objects. Sometimes incorporating found objects, obviously incorporating light to kind of mimic usually these are blinking, but like to mimic like a pulse so that they feel kind of alive. But yeah, and I think that anytime you go through anything difficult, you go either one of 2 ways. You either like close yourself off to the world and become kind of like this narcissistic person that can't handle anything outside of themselves, or you become like extremely empathetic and you recognize injustices that are happening around you. And a lot of the things that I've been observing lately have had to do with technology and how being manipulated all the time by the way that the algorithms are working on every single social media platform. It's created a huge issue with our democracy and how we interact with people online. So I think that like the bubble that I'm creating, it's like my safe space, but it's also like, I named it subliminal stimuli because I wanted it to be kind of like the space where you kind of walk in and you're like around all these things and you're stimulated, and then you leave and you want to come back in because it's like that's your safe bubble, kind of mimicking that experience of being online and in those safe algorithms that we like to be in.
And Matthew, you use these algorithms for your benefit, for your work, because I know the works here at SU Art, there's a little hidden gem on the sides. You have a QR code. If you could explain how you're kind of transforming what Cady is using in her work to kind of add some more interactive elements to yours.
Sure. So if you've seen the work, you may have discovered the QR code on the side. And the QR code links you to a lens for augmented reality, which means, you scan the QR code, it links you to either Instagram or Snapchat, depending upon, what's being used. And then you point your phone at the painting, the OSB, and there's information there. Like it reveals further information about the OSB, about the history of the OSB, and about what the OSB has been used for, and then about what it could potentially be used for. So kind of at a first level, I'm able to use the augmented reality almost to build an archive about the material or about kind of anything I want, like I can really program in any information to be set in front of that. And that's, it's for this group of work, but I'm obviously not the first artist using augmented reality to place information or images or hide information or images, from you. It's, for me, it's more functional. Like the augmented reality and the information that's laid in front of you is not a flashy image or anything. It's, it's information about the material, and then it's, potential invitation for interaction. And it's text, right? Like it's not anything crazy. Like there might be a moment of kind of, oh wow, like there might be kind of this second where it's being used as something to stimulate you visually, but it's really more utilitarian. It's really more kind of functional to what I'm trying to do. And there's a couple ways that this potentially helps me get what I want, right? Like there's I can reveal more information. That's the first layer. The second layer is I can ask people to interact if they want to, right? And that can be physical interaction. Like the fourth panel literally says, this has been OSB has been basically the substrate for, cryptid communication in, out in the world, for various ways and for various reasons. Like, what does it mean to have this type of cryptid conversation in the gallery? And could we? Yeah. And depending upon who you are, that could be interpreted as, you can draw all over me, which, is a little bit of a challenge to what is acceptable in the gallery. Beyond that, though, like augmented reality has been around for a good 10 years now. And whether people realize they've been interacting with it or not, that's what Snapchat bunny ears are. That's what, that's what every single face filter on Instagram is. Okay. Like that's all augmented reality, and it's becoming more and more and more accessible, right? Like cutting edge technology, when it first comes out, it's not a crazy important concern of mine because it's not accessible, and it probably costs money to attain. But then as something is around longer and longer and more people mess with it, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but gradually it becomes more accessible to everybody. And the software that I'm using to create basically that augmented lens is free. It can be downloaded to any computer. And right now you have to use your computer to kind of build these things. I'm sure there are some people that can probably do it from their phone right now, and they don't need a computer at all. But within a year or two, you won't need a computer at all. And I've received some feedback no, this is too techy, this is technological, only people who have basically tech knowledge will understand how to interact with this. It's well, the QR code is also not something that's not new, right? The QR code was not aesthetically pleasing, but I used it because people know what it is, and most people will understand how to interact with it. Going a step beyond that is, the augmented reality I'm using is based off of some kind of target recognition, right? Basically you point your phone at the OSB, it recognizes the pattern, and then something pops up. Other people in other places, as long as they have an image of that same piece of OSB, can create other things that can go right over it without my saying anything. And I have a friend in Washington who is an alumnus of Syracuse who did just that. He basically he took one of my paintings and he said, hey, go down to the gallery, I'm gonna send you a lens. And he sent me a Snapchat lens, and then I am watching his art unfold on top of my art in my MFA show.
Oh, wow.
So, so that kind of breeds a whole nother level of potential interaction where it's oh, I could leave messages about, this or that, or I could create work over this person's work that's not there, but I can send it to them and then they can respond to it. And there's kind of this potential that I'm excited about, I think.
Yeah, that's so exciting because talking to all three of you about your works, Matthew, you're really embracing this almost loss of autonomy. You're putting your work out there, you're creating it for people to interact with, and then you're letting them interact with it. You're letting them take control and do what they can and what they want to with the technology and accessibility that's available to them. And Cady and Aisha, you interacted with it very differently as you're trying to understand your autonomy and understand who you are, and that the work you create gives you that. So those are very different ways to approach it, but that's really exciting. Just to get to a couple questions, because I have a couple popping into our chat. I'm going to share them with you. I'll say them aloud so you all know. And we'll use about 15 minutes for this Q&A. So if there is anything that you're really curious about the artist had mentioned, but didn't get the time to get into, please just pop them in the chat or the Q&A and I'll share it with the artist. From Juan Juarez, and this is for Matthew, could you please address how technology, or more specifically, augmented reality, introduces an element of interaction with the viewer of the work? So you just mentioned that. Have you had any other opportunities where that's come up with people in the galleries yet?
Not so far. I started this research probably at the beginning of this semester, and this is the second time I've shown it in a space. We have found out that the augmented reality works really with any even image of the work. So if you pull up an image of one of those paintings on my website and then point the lens at the computer screen, it works.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
so our viewers at home can hopefully interact with this as well and see it. That's incredible.
They could. So, I mean, there's that's been a thing, but yeah, I mean, it's still relatively new to me how I've been kind of asking people to interact through the lenses. Yeah.
That is really incredible. And also a challenge to those who are viewers who are here and our viewers who will watch this later to see what you can do with Matthew's work here at the MFA show. Aisha, there's a question here for you that states, what role does ethnography play in your work at Cfac, and how is this integrated into your larger body of work?
So in both my pieces, the first one, which the first layer was my my own self-portraits, and then on top of it, the documentation that I did over the past 2-3 years of everything that was going around me. So I think in the documentation, the ethnography part comes in the documentation. And while you are looking at the documentation and then connect it back to me, that's the role of ethnography in my work, that I'm trying to study myself through where I am from. So when I study where I'm from, I'm able to study myself. So that's where the ethnography part comes into play. And when you, as I mentioned earlier, in both the works, the 2D and the video work, when you actually sit down and you actually pay attention, you can actually read what you want to read, and second, while you're reading it, you're also making sort of a visual, or in your own language, trying to understand or decode what kind of person this is. Because I have placed my own portraits in a way that, when a criminal is asked to have those, all the profile done. So in a way, I'm really exposing myself to the point I feel like I'm a criminal, divulging these secrets that I shouldn't, because these images are taken from, they're very raw images in the sense that they weren't constructed. They were taken as the things they were happening, similar with the video. So that's how ethnography plays part when I document. So my documentation is very important in understanding myself and what I create. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Juan, if it hasn't, you can always come back into the chat. There's no other open questions right now, but I have a question for all of you. This is kind of the summation of everything you've been working on at SU over the past 3 years. And I'm wondering if you guys have really had the opportunity, I know it's probably stressful as you're finishing all this, to think about what's next, but do you see your work pushing you in any certain direction as you move forward in this next step of your life and your career? Cady, if you want to start with that, if you have an answer to that, I don't want to put you on the spot.
That's a big question.
It is, yeah.
I think, I guess I can tell you my dream is to kind of take over an old warehouse and just do like different rooms and see what I can do in each different room and just fill it all the way up with all my stuff. That's what I would love to do. But I see myself kind of doing a little bit of everything. I'm originally came in as a painter, so I've always got that in my back pocket. I've got a lot of collage work and then sculptural work. So I think I'm dipping my finger. I'll probably be dipping my fingers in a whole bunch of different arenas to come, I think.
I think there's a lot of opportunities around Syracuse to utilize these old warehouse buildings. I'm thinking particularly of Syracuse Can Company's old building, that we could look at making that happen, which would be exciting to see.
Yeah.
Your works go from this very intimate space that you have on view right now at Point of Contact to a larger multi-body kind of space. Aisha, do you see yourself and your works, these themes you're exploring now, do you see them continuing at all?
Definitely. I mean, the ethnography part of it, I think it's going to later turn into an auto ethnography. So I do want to explore that a lot, to the point that I want to go out of the gallery. I want to create site-specific works, because themes that I'm talking about, they need to be reflected upon the people that I'm documenting mostly. That the questions I'm trying to raise is for their behalf, like on their behalf, I'm trying to raise these questions, and it's for them, that they need to really, question about language, the way they are in society and why they are in society. And we really need to break a lot of the bubbles that I would not go in detail right now. So that's why I feel this research, because I feel like my work is a research. It's an ongoing research. So nothing is in its completely finished form, because it's still going. It's like layers. It's still building on. So yeah, I see my work mostly outside, in like mostly site specific, and then after that, because as I've told you, I'm interested in how the work transforms in itself. By that, how people interact with it, would they tear it down, how the elements, the natural elements are going to interact with it. So documenting that would be my second part. And that would be, I would say, something I would be keeping as a binder, or making a book of it, like how, where it started, how it's going, and how it sort of ended. So yeah, it's going to be a research upon another research.
Yeah, I think that's particularly important for your work. As being in a gallery space, it does kind of displace the conversation that you're putting forward, because although these are reflections of what you've observed and your own personal narratives, they apply to larger communities, and they bring forth issues of change that needs to happen. So I can see that moving forward for you, and I can't wait to watch and follow that up. And Matthew, I know your work in particular has utilized the outside spaces as kind of a way of interacting with work. You've mentioned some to me in the past. Do you think that work, or the work you're working on right now at Syracuse, is going to continue as you move forward?
Yeah, the work that I've been placing outside, or the body of work that I was working on before the exhibition, that's about a 5-year project. And it's one of those things where I put work out in the open and invite people to interact with it. And then I also go back and interact with it, and participate with it, and kind of document it as time goes on. And I think that's going to move back into the forefront. And part of that is simply figuring out where we're going to land after graduate school. Are we staying here? Are we, what place are we going to? And then I'm probably going to, do a bunch of research in whatever community that is, if it's not Syracuse, and probably continue that work there. Also, I don't know what the studio situation is going to be. None of us really know what the studio situation is going to be. So I've been trying to divulge ways where I kind of have 3 different tiers of work that can either be, really worked on in kind of the digital space, really worked on kind of a small studio space, and then kind of a book of ideas about, okay, so let's say I get, a big, access to a big place with a lot of resources. Like, what am I going to do when what am I going to do when I get there? So lots of planning. I feel that everybody comes to graduate school for different reasons. And, like some people come to school and then really dig into the idea they already have and spend 3 years on it. And I can't speak for Cady or Aisha, but I very much came to graduate school to really figure out what I wanted to talk about, and also to really, kind of all I had ever done before that was painted in, drawing and painting. And I came to Syracuse partly to explore other options. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I really got what I needed out of the experience, because now I have a bunch of ideas and kind of a bunch of places to research. So I don't know, I'm pretty excited for the future.
Oh, I'm excited as well. Cady, there's one last question that came on for you. And the question is, do you think your installation is kind of a world building, or what kind of takeaway do you wish to leave in the participant after experiencing your work?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a world building. Like, this is my own little world, which I'm usually in. So I think I want participants to take away me, like I want them to leave with this, like, I want it to be almost sticky in their minds, like this is this weird thing that they didn't probably understand fully, that they're just like really curious about, that they're still thinking about. That to me would be the best thing. If they got under all of those layers that we were talking about and got all of that from it, that would be the dream. But yeah, I think bare minimum, I just want them to be left with this like awe-inspiring experience, and like a little bit of escape from the world.
I love that. There is a question that was just opened in our Q&A, and I see, Aisha, you've already answered this, but for Matt and Cady, who haven't seen it yet, Anshul, who's another MFA artist working here, her work's here at SU Art. Her question is, looking back, what advice would you give to your first year self? Aisha, I'll let you start since you just answered that in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I said to work outside your comfort zone or beyond it. You know, as artists or it's as individuals, we tend to actually stay in that area because we know it, we're familiar with it. Going outside is, I feel like it's the most adventure and the most learning that happens. If I could go back, definitely I would tell myself to not do what you're comfortable with. Do that makes you very uncomfortable, makes you feel like you don't belong. Like, you know, in a strange place when you go there, when you don't know anything about it, that's where the most learning happens. So yeah.
Insightful.
Cady, you got to go next.
Okay. I think the advice I would give myself is to not care what anybody thinks, because I think that at the end of the day, you're going to leave here, like we're leaving here with a degree, and the voices that are here are staying here, and I have to leave with, I'm leaving with myself and my body of work that I wanted to create for myself and for my audience that is going to understand me. So I think that was a big thing, was kind of getting up the gumption to just not listen to people sometimes.
For me, it would probably be the words like, it will happen. And what that means is, like, I often found myself kind of frustrated because things weren't going in the direction that I thought they would go, or I didn't understand something as well as I thought I understood something. And just, you know, through continual conversations and through continual interaction and just continuing instead of, you know,
Being stagnant,
kind of just being frustrated. Like, yeah, like eventually things became clear, and things continue to become clear, you know, whether that be theory or what I think I'm writing about that someone, you know, misinterprets, like, or misunderstands, you know, like, I think we talked about earlier, like language is clunky, right? The English language is clunky, but it's like this thing that it's this thing that, like, we, you know, if we're not looking at each other, it's like this, the only thing we have to communicate with, right? Or if we're not speaking directly to, well, it's still the English language. So it's like, you know, just kind of, it will happen. Like, stop overthinking, try not to be frustrated. It's going to be frustrated. This is not supposed to be easy. Stop pretending like it's supposed to be easy. You know, like all of the information that I would give to my first year self would be along those lines. And then it would also end with kind of like Cady said, consider the source of criticism, and consider the, you know, and not just like, not to write them off, but like, you know, consider what the person, or what the, you know, how much does the person criticizing know about you? How much are they trying to know about you? How much are they trying to give you to the benefit of the doubt? How much are they trying to criticize you in order to invalidate you, to validate themselves?
Right.
Like all of those things, right? And then even after that, it's like, but did they have something good to say? Like, can I take anything away from that? So those would be my two things. Just like kind of trust the process, and then consider the source of criticism.
Mhm.
Also, when you're talking about criticism, I feel like this is the best form of compliment, being criticized, because it opens up, again, those venues that you were trying to avoid. So take everything that I think the graduate school has to offer, and criticism is the highlight of it. You are here in that graduate school to be, chiseled. So you cannot be chiseled if you don't take criticism.
Mhm. It is true. Growth happens through the challenge, and I think something also students can take from coming into this experience, whether they're undergraduate, graduate, exploring their PhD, that there's a sense of community here, and those communities directly around you, whether it's through your program, through where you live, through the larger school, that is what builds you up and connects you. And I really want to wrap this all up by thanking you guys. You guys have created an incredible community of artists, and this MFA show just speaks brilliantly to all of that and the beautiful work that you do. I also wanted to thank Syracuse University Art Museum for hosting this panel, and to thank Community Folk Art Center and Point of Contact Gallery for their contributions and collaboration. If you're part of the university community, you're welcome to come view these works in person at each of the galleries. Please see each venue's website or Facebook for available dates and timeframes. If you're outside the university, I invite you to follow each of the venues and each of the artists on their websites and their Instagrams to engage with them virtually and the works on view, and to find more opportunities to connect with the artist as they move forward into their next incredible endeavors. Again, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, thank you guys for joining us here. This was an incredible talk, and I can't wait to share this recorded session with you at a later date.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you.